The snow fell quietly all night, covering the chilly ground with a soft downy blanket. In the morning, the sun came into the room from behind the curtain. Outside the window there was a rustling and some fiddling. It was a flock of tits lingering on the windowsill. Since about November, Amanda had been feeding them daily, most often with a handful of seeds. They quickly got used to it, and every day they came back for their rations. When the birds saw the feeder through the window, they became animated, and one of them tapped twice with his beak on the window. "Open up, we are already here." This funny scene made the girl laugh, and she rushed to the kitchen. There were no sunflower seeds, and the bread sliced from dinner came in handy. The tits approved the simple treat and with enthusiasm began to drag it from each other. While the girl watched this merry bustle, vague images from her distant childhood began to surface in front of her inner gaze. Once, from the same slices of bread, she had prepared an unpretentious treat for herself and her younger brother Carl. All she had to do was wet the slices lightly and sprinkle sugar on top. The impromptu cake crunched on her teeth. It was sugary, but delicious. They hardly ever had sweets in the house. Sometimes her mother's guests, mostly men, lavished the children with candy or chocolates. Amanda remembered the time when their rather spacious apartment was still breathing the freshness of a recent makeover, with a lace doily on the dresser and an almost brand new television set in the corner. Mom was still unusually good then. Thick, shiny blonde curls scattered over her graceful shoulders. Amazingly beautiful white chiffon dress with blue flowers emphasized the cornflower blue color of sparkling eyes. Mama's suitors smelled of tobacco and pleasant cologne. One of them lingered for a long time. Uncle Tim liked the girl. A kind smile on his freckled face and constant jokes gave him a good man. In the skillful hands of a man, everything went well. He was constantly fixing something, disassembling and assembling. In the house then there was not a single wobbly door and non-functioning switch. In the bathroom there were shelves, and even the old washing machine snorted merrily again on weekends. The toolkit, various screwdrivers and soldering irons delighted little Carl. From his new acquaintance he did not leave a step, admiringly watching his wizardry. Uncle Tim demanded from his mother to participate in the household. He did not tolerate dirty dishes and made sure that the children were fed on time and cleanly dressed. The wayward woman did not like moralizing, and all the time called the man a bore and a tyrant. She wanted from life lightness and a holiday every day. Disputes arose more and more often and became louder. Their relationship was predetermined. The bag with the man's belongings disappeared from the pantry along with the tool case. Along with it, the coziness and balance of the house had gone. Mother, as if off the chain, drinking, partying. Noisy companies often stayed late in the kitchen. From time to time, she didn't sleep at home. On such nights, Carl climbed under Amanda's blanket, snuggled up to her, and she whispered to him long tales about the evil Baba Yaga, about the fearless Little Red Riding Hood, about hard-working dwarves. Once in a while, the mother became the same for a few days. In one such interval, the woman came to her neighbor with a spare key to the front door and a request to look after the children sometimes. She complained to her at length about life and the lack of money. Aunt Kate was a heavy, tall brunette with a perpetual perm on her head. She was the head of the personnel department at a research institute in the city, and she had gotten her mother a job there as a janitor. She had no sympathy for her drunken neighbor, but she felt sorry for the children. And then, suddenly, the mother calmed down and settled down. It seemed she had finally gotten her mind right, and now everything was going to work out in their lives. Rose was born. Funny-eyed little girl immediately turned into everyone's favorite. Even the strict neighbor could not remain indifferent and cheerfully hummed to her when meeting. The father of the child was unknown, as well as the father of Amanda and Carl. The children had long ago stopped asking their mother this question, causing her only irritation. No matter what, they loved her very much. Now she resembled the former tender mommy again, often in a flurry of squeezing and kissing, singing lullabies, and on weekends frying golden lace pancakes. But very soon the mother was bored with the role of caring head of the family, and again spun a merry-go-round of cavaliers and drinking buddies. The current guests smelled of booze and stale unwashed body. From under their clothes, blue tattoos were visible, and the children received at best an indifferent look, and at worst, a scolding. The gifts were reduced to a bottle of liquor and a modest snack. The care of Rose was completely transferred to the older children, and the lion's share of it fell on Amanda's fragile shoulders. Money was woefully short. In order to keep up with everything, the girl had to sometimes skip classes at school, but the natural ingenuity and inquisitive mind allowed her to maintain her grades at a good level. Teenage interests faded into the background, and a few girlfriends disappeared from view. Her mother seemed to be trying to burn her soul with vodka, or just forget herself in the alcoholic frenzy, at least for a short time. She completely stopped looking after herself. In her unwashed hair, gray hair, wrinkles furrowed her face, heavy bags under her eyes were blue. More and more often she was unable to show up for work. Amanda took pity on her, filling in for her and scrubbing the floors so she wouldn't get fired. And then the mother became pregnant again and made no secret of the fact that she had decided to keep the child just for the benefit. It was as if the mother's wish had finally come true. She had managed to burn out all her feelings and memories, leaving only indifference. Indifference to everything and everyone. Every day she would sit on a bench in the yard with a plastic bottle of cheap beer and sip the warm, foul-smelling liquid, staring at the same spot for hours. Amanda increasingly had to work in her mother's place. It was very hard to study and work and take care of the younger ones. It was good that Carl took over some of the chores. In her absence, he could cook a simple meal. It was usually overcooked pasta or sticky porridge, but his older sister always praised the 12-year-old for his help. Rose was almost 6 by then. That afternoon, Amanda returned from school and noticed an ambulance outside her driveway. She flew up to the floor and burst into the apartment and was horrified by the scene. On a medical stretcher lay her mother. Her deadly pale face was covered with drops of cold sweat, and a pool of blood was visible on the floor nearby. A young paramedic was setting up an IV, and an elderly doctor with a tense face was saying something on the phone. "What happened?" The girl whispered, frightened, and knelt down by the stretcher. "Mommy! Mommy, my dear! What's wrong with you?" "Your mother has massive uterine bleeding. We need to get her to the hospital right away," the doctor said. Amanda made a decision. "I'm coming with you. I'm not letting her go alone. I won't let her go alone." The doctor was in a hurry and nervously said, "No. No relatives are allowed in the ambulance. It is forbidden by the regulations." Amanda was very worried about her mother, who was not very young, so she was not going to back down. "No, please, I beg you. I will not interfere," she persuaded the strict doctor. Large tears flowed down her cheeks. Looking eyes full of pleading, the doctor softened and waved his hand. "Okay, we will argue longer. Let's go," and took the handles of the stretcher. In the hospital, the girl was given a white coat and allowed to wait in the corridor, near the operating room. There was an unhealthy commotion. No one paid any attention to Amanda. Doctors running into the operating room were exchanging phrases. A 45-year-old woman, placental abruption, massive bleeding. The gray-haired head of the department asked a young midwife running by, "Anesthesiologists informed?" "Yes," she replied. "It's about someone else." Tried to convince herself frightened girl. After a while, a tired doctor came out of the operating room. Amanda's heart clenched anxiously. "You, daughter?" "Yes," she exhaled, fearfully awaiting the medical verdict. The man sympathetically put his hand on her shoulder. "Hold on, girl. We did everything possible, but it was too late. Your mother died." He was silent for a second, letting her realize the sad news, and continued, "The child was saved. You now have a healthy brother." It seemed that the girl was hit by something heavy and soft on the head. Her eyes darkened. It became hard to breathe. Time and space ceased to exist. "Mommy, Mommy, my poor baby." Tears rolled in large hail down her cheeks. A woman in a white robe brought her out of her daze. "Girl, are you sick?" Amanda exhaled deeply and answered with naughty lips, "I'm fine, thank you." A decision had to be made, and something had to be done. How? And what? What to do next? The girl did not know how to ask correctly. An elderly nurse came closer. "Further, take your father and come." "We don't have a father," Amanda whispered confusedly. "Well, do you have a grandmother? Any older relatives?" The girl shook her head negatively. "Only a younger brother and sister." A kind-hearted woman sat down next to her. "The body will have to be taken away and buried." "The body," Amanda even flinched at that word. "It's her mommy." The mommy who loved her, who sang lullabies to her as a baby, cradled her soothingly when she cried. The body. The nurse felt sorry for the orphan and tried to help as much as she could. Go outside, go further down the street, into the archway and into the yard. You'll see a sign, ritual services. They'll tell you everything. And when can I pick up the child? The girl suddenly realized. And how old are you? The woman looked closely at her. 17, Amanda said slowly, beginning to realize where she was going. Who would give him to you? The nurse sighed and shook her head sadly. He'll go to an orphanage. And when I turn 18, will I be able to take my brother? A little light of hope lit up in the girl's sad eyes. I don't think so. Such children are adopted very quickly. You'd better think of yourself. You yourself should be sent to an orphanage. Cruel but honest answer dumbfounded the girl. From such a prospect the world suddenly began to fall to pieces. And indeed no one would understand that the children have long been independent, and Amanda is ready to work day and night just to keep them apart. No, we have help. The neighbors are there. And in general, she backtracked. The nurse just shrugged her shoulders and stopped talking. The funeral home promised to take care of everything and rolled out a long bill. Her legs turned into heavy weights and she struggled to move. All the way back, Amanda couldn't figure out how to break the sad news to little Rose and sensitive Carl. Her thoughts were muddled. She didn't notice how she'd gotten there. Her neighbor was waiting for her. So, how's Mom? Now Amanda would have to say it out loud for the first time. Mom is dead. She struggled to get it out of herself and her lower lip trembled treacherously. God. The woman shook her hands sympathetically. The girl looked down, not wanting to tell the details. She remembered the sad troubles ahead and held out the bill in her hand. Aunt Kate, will you help me? I only have half the money I've been saving for graduation. I'll pay you back later. Sure, what are we talking about? The woman took the paper in her hands. On the threshold of the girl met a happy Rose, embraced her with both hands, pressed and shouted, Hooray! Amanda is here! Carl looked out of the room with a textbook in his hand. Have you been to the hospital? And suddenly froze when he saw his big sister's face. What about Mom? Yes, I was. She walked slowly into the kitchen and collapsed on a chair in exhaustion. It was as if someone had thrown 1,000 blankets over her shoulders, but her mind was surprisingly clear. The children followed her. Rose glared at her sister with her huge cornflower eyes, not understanding why her beloved Amanda didn't look like herself. Carl waited anxiously. Where's Mom? Rose asked nonchalantly. Amanda covered her eyes for a second and sighed heavily. Rose, Mommy's gone. Her tired voice sounded unaccustomedly muffled. Carl, who had grown up early, held his breath with a stone face. He had gotten it right. What do you mean, no? The youngest was surprised. She's gone? She flew away to the sky. There was a scene in some movie where the death of her parents was explained to the little heroine. To the moon? When is she coming back? Rose was frantic with questions. She won't come back, but she'll be watching us all the time from above, and we'll live together as friends. The childlike ease of the little girl helped the older sister to pull herself together. The responsibility for their fate now fell entirely on her. She tried to hug both children, but Carl broke free and ran away. She knew it was better not to touch him now, let him be alone with his thoughts. A little later she went into the bedroom. Lying on the bed, the boy tried to hide his crying face from his sister. Amanda lay down next to him and hugged him just as she had when she was a child, when she quietly told him bedtime stories. I'm in a lot of pain too, Carl, but I have you and Rose, and I have a family. We'll get through this together, won't we? She whispered to her brother. Her little sister caught up with them. I want to go with you, she said, climbing up and settling between them. Carl didn't mind, and so they lay cuddled together until nightfall. Amanda told them old fairy tales and the nightlight cast fanciful shadows on the walls and ceiling. It seemed as if the three of them were in a strange world, where the frightening unknown lay ahead of them, and only together could they overcome all the obstacles in their way. The next day, Aunt Kate made a quick trip to the funeral home, and the bill for services was cut almost in half. Aliona did not care. She only wished that the farewell had gone as it should. A day later, everything was ready. The funeral was quite modest. Of the many drinking buddies and cavaliers, no one showed up. Maybe they just didn't know. A few neighbors, Carl and Amanda, wearing a large black shawl that Aunt Kate had lent her. Rose decided not to bring it with her so as not to traumatize her and took it to the daycare center. Heartfelt neighbors sincerely felt sorry for the children, although the deceased herself during her lifetime did not pity. They collected a small amount of money, just enough to cover the missing difference for funeral services. Mom looked much better than she had when she was alive. Amanda hadn't remembered such a calm, peaceful expression on her face in a long time. It seemed that in the next moment she would open her eyes and marvel that she was lying in a coffin. This absurd thought lodged in the girl's head and did not let her cope with her emotions. Tears poured down in torrents without ceasing, all the way to the cemetery. Only when, after the farewell, the coffin was lowered and men with shovels slowly and measuredly began to fill the hole with earth, it became a little easier, or maybe just all the tears poured out. The few people who were seeing him off dispersed. The children hugged each other and silently mourned at their mother's grave. Relations between the children became even better than before. Each knew his area of responsibility. Carl, on the way to school, took his younger sister to kindergarten, and on the way back picked her up, then fiddled in the kitchen, cleaned as a boy, as he could, and in the evening did his homework. Amanda attended classes to avoid being expelled from the graduating class, and after lunch she rushed to wash floors in the entrances of neighboring houses. She'd been turned down for a job at the research institute. Even Rose stopped cranky in the morning and helped around the house. The thought of an unknown little brother did not give rest. Where was he and what about him? Now we'll ring the last bell, and then a little more, and the birthday, and then you can rush to find the baby. Just wait for me. I'll find you. The girl thought wistfully every day before she went to bed. Aunt Kate began to look in almost every day. She went around the rooms, looked in the closet and refrigerator, and called it Care for Orphans. Business Neighbor has already had time to put an eye on the spacious 3-room apartment, because the children will still be sent to an orphanage. And then recently, the son decided to get married and brought to their small apartment his chosen one. The prospect of providing the newlyweds with spacious meters, and even with furniture, did not give her peace. But time passed, and the situation with the neighbor's housing did not change. The deceased's eldest daughter had already finished school and received her certificate, but it was as if they had forgotten about the children. It was necessary to take everything into their own hands. One evening, having cleaned up the next entryway and returned home, Amanda found 2 unfamiliar women in the apartment. A brunette with a short haircut, wearing a dark suit and thick-rimmed glasses, was sitting at a desk writing something. The other woman, the blonde opposite, wearing a mustard-colored jacket over a black knit dress, stood in front of Rose and Carl. They were huddled on the couch, looking like hunted animals. Apparently she had just compelled them to do something. "Ah, there's Amanda! We've been waiting for you!" the blonde guest exclaimed. The welcome and friendliness in her voice contradicted the cold official look. "My name is Ellen. This is Margaret." The woman at the table looked at the girl from under her glasses. "We represent Child Protective Services." Amanda already understood everything, but in her heart there was hope for a happy outcome of the situation. The woman continued, "We've received information about 3 underage children living here unsupervised. I'll be 18 in 6 months. The girl hastened to specify. "Honey, you're still legally a child for a few months. Your family has suffered grief and the state is taking custody of you. We are here to help," the official explained affectionately but firmly. "Pack your things, yours and the younger children. But we are coping. We are clean and have everything we need." Amanda tried to prove her point. The social worker shook her head condescendingly. Her gaze froze all life around her and her tone was intolerant of objection. "Gather round. There's nothing to discuss. You can't just tear us down right now tonight." The older sister's nerves began to fray with despair and impotence. "Not only can we do it, but we have to do it," the woman assured her calmly and added, "Please don't make us call for help and use force. After all, you will only scare the younger children." Crying silently, Amanda gathered everything she needed, and the 3 orphans set off into the unknown. For a few days they stayed in a small house with only about 10 children. The educators put them in a separate room, fed them well, and did not bother them at all. Carl and Rose did not leave Amanda's side. They were focused, but calm. The girl had already accepted and decided for herself that in such conditions they could painlessly wait for her adulthood. The main thing, not separated. But it turned out that here they were just waiting for distribution. 3 days later, a car with social workers came to pick up Rose and Carl. The older girl had to go to another orphanage. It was heartbreaking to hear her baby sister crying. Amanda kissed the little girl goodbye and through her tears vowed that very soon she would find them and take them away. Carl experienced the parting in silence, only getting into the car through his older sister. "We will be waiting for you." His soul split into pieces. One of them was taken away in an unknown direction by a car, together with his brother and sister. Instead of her, the coldness settled inside. At the new place, devastated and indifferent to her surroundings, Amanda sat on the bed in the girls' bedroom for several days, and the other girls were not too interested in the new girl. In the orphanage, they did not pity each other at all. There were their own rules. A few girls of the same age bullied and robbed the younger ones. Watching such cases, Amanda imagined that it could be her brother and sister, and one day she couldn't bear it and stood up for the offended child. Now she was being victimized. At first, she was simply planted dead mice in her nightstand or spoiled food in the dining room. But finally, she was cornered late at night. "If you don't bring a couple $100 tomorrow, you'll be sorry," the main bully hissed in her face. Amanda realized that there would be no life for her here, and it was useless to complain to the teachers. It would only aggravate her situation. And the next day the girl ran away. It happened spontaneously. She just went out in what she was outside the gate, which someone forgot to close. In her pocket there was only an old button phone, inherited from her mother, and a small amount of money. These she hadn't laid out, having ended up in an orphanage. About 50 meters away there was a bus stop, where a white minibus was coming. The decision came suddenly. It seemed like an eternity. She was going somewhere far away, outside the city. There was no plan. The jubilation of unexpected liberation was replaced by uncertainty in the correctness of the act. And so, when small, pretty houses with colorful roofs, drowning in greenery, replaced ascetic high-rise buildings, at one of the stops, the bus suddenly stopped. "The end," loudly announced the driver. The Marschrutka got rid of the last passengers, turned around and drove away, leaving a dusty cloud in its wake. Amanda found herself on the outskirts of the city. The unknown was frightening and exhilarating, but she didn't want to go back. She couldn't go home either. They would look for her there first of all. And there were no more illusions about the intentions of Kate's business aunt. Her gaze fell on the road sign before the highway exit. "Downy Village, Berezovsky," it read. Memory is an amazing thing. Sometimes sounds, pictures, or conversations, once accidentally, snatched and archived in the depths of the human brain for a while, resurface. This was exactly that moment. Immediately recalled the conversation between two old ladies' neighbors, which she heard last year, passing by the bench at the entrance. "It's a pity. On the dacha, strength is no longer enough. As my husband was gone, so never been 3 years soon. And there is such a nice house and a small plot with its own well. The village of Berezovsky, maybe you've heard of it? The outermost house with a blue roof and blue shutters, it's the only one there. The plan was born all by itself, to settle in this dacha and stay there until she came of age." Amanda took the money out of her pocket and counted it. The plan was immediately supplemented with one more item. It was urgent to find a job. After about 15 minutes of walking at the edge of a small grove of birch trees, the neighbor's dacha loomed as a blue blur. Amanda pushed open the gate, which creaked and opened welcomingly. The tiny plot of land and the dilapidated dwelling were in disrepair. The path was barely visible through the grass. The dusty, sun-bleached shutters were closed and covered with ivy. Just in case, the girl knocked, but of course there was no answer. The door was closed. After a moment's thought, Amanda leaned on the dirty mat. A small silver key was found underneath. The inside of the room smelled of dust and damp. It was pitch black. Without hope, she pressed the switch on the right side of the door and, miraculously, a dim light bulb came on under the low ceiling. This good fortune inspired her to explore further. The old cabin consisted of one room and a kitchen. There were the bare necessities for a modest existence: 2 old metal beds, a table, chairs, a wood stove in the corner, and various utensils. In the bedroom there was a dusty bookcase. Apparently the owner was a book lover. The shutters gave way easily and let in the sunlight. The golden rays immediately settled on the walls and gave the room a certain atmospheric quality. It had taken all day to clean. Tired but satisfied with herself, she sat down on the wooden porch, still holding the warmth of the sultry day. The heavy thoughts began to return again. In front of her eyes stood, full of unchildlike longing, the parting look of her brother and the unhappy crying face of her little sister. The older sister did not yet understand in detail how she would be able to unite the family, but vowed that she would do everything for it. Finding a job proved difficult. The internet was slow, but Amanda studied the ads in every available source without sleep or rest. There were practically no vacancies where she could get a job without a passport. Weighing all the pros and cons, the girl decided to offer her services as a caregiver in the section of free ads. Surprisingly, the next day the phone rang, and a cheerful female voice spoke into the receiver. "Amanda? Hello, I'm from the ad. My name is Catherine. You're still looking for a job as a caregiver, aren't you?" "Yes, but I live far from the city," the girl hurried to clarify. "Excellent." The woman was suddenly happy. "And you do not want to work right at home? I have a husband lying down but has long wanted to go to the village," and added, "With payment will not offend and even pay extra if necessary." After a second's thought, Amanda agreed. "Give me the address and I'll come and get acquainted," the young woman demanded. 3 hours later, a red Jeep stopped at the gate. Catherine looked spectacular, a searing brunette about 25 years old in tight pants and a bright red blouse. She looked like a walking advertisement for a beauty parlor. Her augmented black hair, silicone lips, and unnaturally long eyelashes made her look like a fan of fancy procedures. On the contrary, Aliona's plain appearance, lack of makeup and dark blonde braided hair satisfied the young woman. This was exactly how she thought a maid should look. Faded. Afraid to get dirty. From the threshold, Catherine squeamishly looked into the unpretentious dwelling. "Great, just right," she murmured, which surprised the future nurse. Amanda's attempts to clarify what her husband was ill and what his care wishes would be did not yield any results. The fiery woman only grinned. "Don't worry, tomorrow you'll get to know each other and discuss everything together." In the morning, a specialized car arrived and 2 strong orderlies carried the invalid on a stretcher into the house. Having put a small bag with things on the porch, they immediately left without saying a word. The girl was left alone with an unknown man in a strange house. The new tenant looked to be about 40 years old. Perhaps he had a scruffy beard and the endless fatigue on his face from the pain he was in. His thick chestnut-colored hair had not been touched by a barber's hand for a long time. Sad gray eyes stared indifferently at the ceiling. "My name is Amanda." The girl decided to establish relations and smiled welcomingly. The tenant reluctantly turned his head and looked at the nurse for a while. He did not expect to see a fragile girl in such a role. Her long, dark blonde hair was combed into a neat ponytail. Her nose was small, slightly upturned, her lips were plump, and she had a cute dimple on her cheek. Naive blue eyes radiated sincere participation and good-heartedness. "God, she's just a girl, how can she help me?" he thought, and out loud he introduced himself hoarsely. "John." "Nice to meet you. Your wife hired me, but unfortunately she didn't tell me anything about you." "No wonder." He grinned bitterly and continued sarcastically. "She doesn't know anything about me. And now she doesn't want to know." Amanda tried to imagine what it would be like to go from being a healthy man full of strength to suddenly becoming helpless and dependent on others. Feeling sorry for John, she sat down by the bed and asked, "Why don't you tell me what happened?" Childish directness and naivety conquered the man. No one has long been interested in his state of mind. Suddenly he wanted to share his inner feelings with someone. John had owned a fairly successful construction business for many years. While raising his business, it was not to create a family. But about 2 years ago, one by one, his parents passed away, and a heavy feeling of endless loneliness came over the man. The huge house was emptied overnight, and John did not want to return to the place where he met only the humming echo of footsteps and the quiet rustle of the curtains, slightly swaying from the draft. But the dream of a strong, friendly family remained in his soul. Soon, at a friend's birthday party, met Catherine, and passion swirled him in the rhythm of the tango. Acquaintances repeatedly warned the businessman from rash steps. "Look, say carefully. Very cool, this person. Rumors of all sorts went. But he no longer heard. A bright brunette clung to him with a dead grip. Very little time passed from the first meeting to the March of Mendelssohn. But after the wedding, the shroud of love gradually began to fall. Catherine was not created for a family. She did not want children. She was not interested in spending time at home, alone with her husband. Clubs, parties, and shopping. This is the limit of her dreams. After a hard day's work, returning to the lifeless house and warming up a stale slice of pizza from the nearest bakery, John didn't understand why he'd gotten married. The relationship had frayed, and a few months ago the man had started talking about divorce. The idle wife vowed to mend her ways so as not to lose John. For a while she really sat at home quietly, like a mouse, trying to cook something, smiling strainedly. Often, in the belief that her husband did not notice anything, she closed herself in the bathroom and talked to someone on the phone for long periods of time. Even living together, the spouses were getting farther apart. But 2 months ago, unexpectedly, there was a disaster. John was robbed and beaten to a pulp right on the porch of his own office. Doctors saved his life, but the injury to his cervical spine made him an invalid. The man's body became practically uncontrollable, and the few movements he could make were given with great effort and excruciating piercing pain. The prognosis of the doctors was disappointing. The consequences of the trauma may finally confine him to bed. The attackers were never found. The video cameras were turned off that day. There were no witnesses. The wife appeared at the hospital only twice, and that mostly to discuss the future of the business. Employees of the company called, complaining about Catherine and her unceremonious interference in the affairs of the spouse. Attempts to undo them all failed. A specific area of construction was not to her teeth. The company was still kept solely at the expense of past projects. But John no longer touched anything. Depression struck, and there was no sense in further existence. The world was finally shattered. Even after returning home last week, it didn't get any easier. Cold Catherine smiled falsely and tried to sell her idea of selling the business before it was too late. To make matters worse, the young woman was already practically hiding the calls from her lover. John was physically uncomfortable being under the same roof with her. He was ready to go even to the end of the world, and on the proposal to move out of town immediately agreed. In fact, he didn't care anymore. He was going there to die. "You'll be better off in the countryside. The nurse will look after you," gabbled, seeing him off his wife. "As soon as I sell the business, I'll come to you right away. I think we should sell the house too. Why do we need a 3-story building now?" she reasoned. Amanda was shocked by the story. She wanted to do something to help, but she didn't know how. "Would you like me to make you something? Would you like me to make you something?" was the only thing that came to mind. John smiled kindly for the first time. After such a confession, she felt suddenly light and free. "I want potatoes, fried potatoes." And so they lived together. Amanda skillfully took care of her ward, cooking, washing, and laundry. John did not want to be a heavy burden, and trying to ease the work of a nice nurse made incredible efforts to move somehow. He was already able to take a few steps, leaning on a stick. Every movement was unbearably painful, but the man was not going to give up. He did not want to look like a useless, helpless log in Amanda's eyes. John liked the amazing light-colored girl very much, but he didn't know how to feel about it. In the evenings she would light candles, for the little lamp could not cope with the illumination, and read to him the old books left, so conveniently by the previous owner. Then they talked for a long time about everything in the world, even about space and dinosaurs. The businessman described the countries he had been to. When they ran out of things to talk about, they just stayed silent together, looking at the bizarre shadows dancing on the walls. An elusively thin spiritual thread stretched between them, growing stronger every day. The girl admired this strong, intelligent man. He was trustworthy, and on one of these evenings, she dared to tell her sad story. John was silent for a long time after hearing, digesting the information, and then just briefly said, "Don't worry, everything will be all right." And the girl, for some reason, believed and suddenly realized that she had long been in love with this man. Tragic destinies brought together two lonely, suffering souls. Sometime later, Catherine appeared, as always, defiantly bright, brought with her a young woman, his antipode. She was very small, wearing a black buttoned-up business suit with a short, thin haircut and a large leather briefcase in her hands. "This is the notary," Catherine said nonchalantly to the nurse who met her at the gate. Her determined, bloodthirsty gaze anticipated her long-awaited prey. When she saw John sitting up in bed, the woman faltered. "John, you look good." The feigned intonation couldn't hide the unpleasant surprise and irritation. "Meet Ellen. She'll help us with the paperwork." "What documents?" The man pretended not to understand what she was driving at. "What do you mean? You and I had a deal. Remember? You promised that you would sign over the business and the house to me. I would sell them profitably, move in with you, and we would live together happily ever after. I didn't agree to anything with you, and I'm not going to rewrite anything." The calm face of her husband annoyed the self-serving wife. "But John, we discussed it, remember? I've organized everything. I even brought a notary. You just need to sign," still trying to press her stubborn spouse. "There will be no deals," the man replied firmly and leaned back on the pillow. From the conversation with Catherine, he felt worse. Wild headache. "You don't need anything else. You will rot lying down for the rest of your life. And I'm young. I still have to live and live," flared wife, unable to curb his emotions. "I've said it all." Husband closed his eyes. He wanted Catherine to leave his temporary shelter as soon as possible. The wife looked at the notary with a mute question, but she only shook her head negatively. Biting her lip, the wife belatedly tried to justify herself. "John, I'm sorry. I'm just very worried about you, so I snapped. Rest, darling, rest. I'll come back later." And the official delegation immediately left. Before leaving, Catherine came very close to Amanda and, leaning over, said in a low voice, "Listen, I guess when I hired you, I forgot to explain that my husband will get worse and worse. The doctor said he will not help. Do not have to try so hard. Just broth once a day, splash him in a bowl, and that's it. And then I'll pay you more. A lot of pay." She meaningfully looked into the bright girl's eyes. "Say, if not stupid, you'll understand," and drove off into the city in her fancy car. Amanda shuddered, but she came to her senses quickly. She couldn't worry John. He felt bad enough about the unexpected visit. The heavy smell of Catherine's expensive, sweet, and luscious perfume still hung in the room. The girl opened the window wide open, crouched by the bed, and placed her palm on his forehead. The man opened his eyes. The headache began to slowly go away. "What a blessing that now I have you, Amanda." With tenderness in his voice, he whispered, gently squeezed her narrow palm with his hands, slowly brought it to his lips, and kissed her tenderly. The girl smiled softly and said softly, "Let's have tea." The next day, Amanda needed to replenish her modest food supplies at a small local store. Right next to the store, a 2-story white brick house covered with emerald green tiles attracted her attention every time. There were several cars parked in front of it, and sometimes there was a line of people, some of them with crutches. At the store, Amanda decided to inquire about the reason for the crowds. "Ah, that's Tom, our medicine man, the crutcher. A golden man," replied the ruddy saleswoman. "He gets a lot of people coming to him. He put my brother-in-law back on his feet. He had been suffering from back pain for a long time, and now he's as good as a cucumber." She continued to praise him, hanging sugar sand in bags. "Is it expensive?" the girl asked timidly. "Oh, really? Tom doesn't refuse anyone. He has his own principles. And people thank whoever they can, who brings potatoes, who brings homemade eggs. The rich, of course, give money. They say that one businessman even gave him a car, but he refused such a generous gift. Tom had to get his son back on his feet after the accident." Having paid for the purchases, Amanda went out and waited for all the patients to leave. Fate unexpectedly gave her a chance, and the girl was not going to give it up. A flame of hope flared up and warmed her somewhere inside. 2 hours later, the last patient was taken away by a white Neva, and the girl decisively pressed the bell at the entrance to the yard. Almost immediately, a lanky, wiry man of about 60 with dark eyes and a hooked nose came out. He was dressed in a cotton shirt and loose-fitting, light gray-colored pants that looked like a surgical suit. His thick hands ended in huge, shovel-shaped palms that could probably bend a horseshoe without difficulty. "Hello? Are you Tom?" An agitated voice. "So I'm Tom. That's right. What have you got?" He grinned, his almost black, piercing eyes boring into the stranger from beneath his bushy eyebrows. The girl trembled like a lone aspen in the wind. Male, 35 years old, neck and head injury. Amanda tried to be succinct so as not to waste the healer's precious time. "Bring him in tomorrow at 9. The thick baritone was soothing and reassuring. "We live near here on Zeleniah Street, the last house," the girl added hastily with a pleading look in her large eyes. The healer responded positively. "Okay, I'll come back in the evening," he said briefly and disappeared into the courtyard. At about 7, when the sun had already gone to spend the night behind the roof of a neighboring cottage, Tom appeared. He probed the whole body of the new patient with his usual movements. He started with the neck and head, then with sensitive fingers went down the spine to the coccyx. The healer was extremely focused. He seemed to be completely absorbed in himself. John suddenly cried out, "Does it hurt here? And here?" The healer continued his diagnosis. The patient shrieked and moaned when the pain points were pressed. Amanda huddled like a sparrow in the cold and sat in the corner. Every sound of pain echoed in her soul. Her chest tingled uneasily. "Yes," Tom muttered. "It's too late." "When was the injury?" 3 months ago." "I see." The guest looked carefully into the patient's eyes and suddenly asked seriously, "Do you want to live?" "Yes, I do," he answered just as seriously. The men seemed to understand each other. "It's not easy and not quick." He turned now to Aliona. "Go out, girl, take an hour's walk." The girl obediently jumped out of the house behind the gate. Anxiety in the chest did not let go and therefore did not want to walk at all. "If only it would work, if only it would work, Lord," she prayed mentally. The girl stood in suspense at the leaning fence until Tom came up. He looked very tired, and his shirt was drenched with sweat. "I'll come back tomorrow at the same time," he said briefly in answer to the mute question, and walked slowly back to his room. In a week from the beginning of the treatment there was a clear improvement. His body became more obedient. The pain dulled, and John walked more and more with the stick in his hands. He was no longer tormented by every step, every movement. And now he was walking down the porch steps, and now he was walking out the gate. And finally, slowly but surely, he began to go to the healer for sessions on his own. At first it seemed like a whole expedition, but the healer insisted on a constant load. He also had to accustom himself to daily exercise, once abandoned in the worries of business. Amanda never took a step away from the convalescent. Overwhelmed every morning, she ran around the house doing chores, and in the evening, the long-awaited long walk to Tom's house. They returned late, holding hands and watching the sunset, chatting merrily, tired but happy. John was feeling pretty confident by now. He had long ago made a decision for himself and had started making work calls to keep up to date. Little by little a plan matured. And so, feeling strong enough, the businessman called a cab and went to his office. In the parking lot just stood his wife's car. The delighted subordinates surrounded the chief. Everyone wanted to shake his hand. "John Sergeyevich, at last. You look great." The joy was genuine. He entered his office without knocking. At the desk, Catherine was sorting out a pile of papers. Next to them were a stack of more folders. "What's the matter?" She raised her head, haughty, displeased look, immediately replaced by surprise and a crooked smile. "Hello, Catherine." Her husband was ahead of her reaction and entered quickly enough, leaning only slightly on his wand. His wife swam out from behind the table, feverishly thinking about what to do next. She looked her usual spectacular self-white blouse with the top 2 buttons undone, black leather tight skirt, and lacquered stiletto heels. Bright makeup completed the look. It seemed that in the next moment, she would stretch out, undo a couple more buttons, and spin around the pole. Anxiety flickered in her black eyes. "John? Oh, joy. What a good influence country life has had on you. And it's all thanks to me." She recovered quickly from her surprise and tried to hug him. "Yes, thanks to you." The man grinned, pulling away. "What are you looking for?" "John, I'm trying to save our business. I'm trying to save our business," she said with fake reproach. "Our business?" Husband chuckled, walked around the table and sat down in his chair. "You don't have to worry anymore. I'm freeing you from such a bother and taking everything into my own hands." The young woman immediately oriented herself and tried to change the accent of the conversation. John, I've been here for months, day and night, working hard while you're on vacation in the wilderness. She resented him and pouted resentfully. I heard, Catherine, what you did day and night, so take your things out of the house and see you in court. And I finally met the girl of my dreams. She was the one who went out and saved me. John breathed a sigh of relief. Had he really said what he should have said a long time ago? The sultry brunette turned purple, realizing that she had nothing more to do here. Well, no, you will not get rid of me so easily, she thought angrily to herself and stormed out, slamming the door loudly. The office staff probably guessed what had happened in the director's office. They murmured approvingly and laughed after her. This infuriated Catherine even more. Everything hadn't gone as planned, because of this infestation. She couldn't suppress her rage any longer. Getting into the car, she immediately grabbed the phone and dialed the number of the nurse. "Ah, you ungrateful bitch!" Instead of greeting, she yelled into the receiver. "Who asked you, you fool, to help him? I've already done almost everything. Persuaded my lover and his friend to attack him, agreed on the sale of the business. You bastard, you ruined everything for me." The brunette was hysterical, more for herself than for her interlocutor. Amanda turned off the recording of the conversation and immediately sent it to John, as they had agreed. The man did not even doubt who was to blame for his misfortunes. Knowing his wife's explosive nature, he needed to provoke her to get proof. Then it was a matter of technique: police, investigation, and court. Taking the reins of power, the experienced businessman quickly established the work process. Fortunately, it was not too late. He moved his beloved Amanda to his mansion and proposed marriage because she was 18. With the help of John's connections, they quickly found out the whereabouts of the younger brother and sister. The trip to the orphanage seemed to take forever. Amanda would finally get to see her family. Rose and Carl were already waiting in the lobby, accompanied by a young teacher. When the children saw their favorite long-awaited sister, they rushed to her with all their might. Rose, by old habit, hung on the girl. The boy also put his arms around her neck and snuggled into her shoulder. "Carl! Rose!" The elder sister could not restrain herself any longer, and tears of happiness rolled down her face. The younger sister sobbed too, but could not say a word. Even her brother, who had grown up in 6 months, did not try to hide his wet eyes. It was impossible to remain indifferent at the sight of this heartwarming meeting. The orphanage worker furtively wiped her face with a handkerchief, and John smiled happily. One more problem had to be solved, and the newlyweds arrived at the address where the family used to live. The relatives of the former neighbor were already firmly settled in the apartment. Aunt Kate, in the meantime, ran around an incredible number of notaries and even went to the black realtors. They promised to help legalize the stolen property. But Amanda and John showed up just in time. The neighbor could not accept that the appropriated meters literally slip out of her hands. They had to call the police to evict the insolent tenants from the children's apartment. John's huge house, built by him, originally, for a large friendly family, after many years was finally filled with children's laughter, warmth, and love. The new year was approaching, and the whole family was actively preparing for the celebration. John brought a huge Christmas tree and, with Carl's help, set it up in the spacious living room by the fireplace. Everyone decorated it together. Colorful balls, sparkling icicles, and shining garlands decorated the coniferous beauty. Together they thought over the menu of the festive table, ordered gifts, made wishes, laughed, and fooled around. During the pleasant troubles, only one thought did not give Amanda peace. The thought of her youngest brother. Where is he, little blood? What's wrong with him? Sensing her beloved's longing, her husband secretly began to gather information about the child. One day, coming from work, he without foreplay laid out on the table documents. His young wife looked up at him in surprise. "His name is Sean. He is in the second baby home. He's not adopted yet, but potential parents have recently come forward and are still being vetted," the man reported. Amanda grabbed the papers and began to frantically leaf through them, her lips trembling, tears flooding the words printed on the paper. "Sean, my dear blood, my darling, I wish I could see you." The tenderness for her unknown brother, the little man, overwhelmed the girl. A little crying, she gratefully embraced her husband. "Thank you, my dear." But she did not dare to ask the main question. John understood everything without words. "It will not be easy. but I promise you that I will do everything possible and impossible to take him to us." And Amanda believed him. She had always believed him. "Thank you. I love you so much." She now knew exactly what she would wish for New Year's Eve. Amanda woke up from her exciting memories. The Tits had already eaten breakfast and gone about their bird business. In the yard, the children were frolicking, enjoying the huge snowdrifts and the day off. Pink-cheeked Rose in a white jacket and the same color furry hat with ears was like some cute animal. The girl's friend, a French bulldog, dressed also in a small dog puff, excitedly floundered and snorted nearby. Together they were building some sort of huge snow cave. The happy squealing and dog barking echoed throughout the neighborhood. The more serious and reserved Carl was skiing around the property. Sitting on the railing, a big important ginger cat looked on condescendingly, not wanting to join in lest he get his paws wet. Amanda moved away from the window and leaned over to the crib. Sean was peacefully sleeping. So small and touching, he had recently returned to the family, and it was as if he had never left it. Amanda suddenly grabbed her stomach. Something inside, in the diaphragm area, fluttered like a small bird. The heroine already knew that another life was born, another loved one. A feeling of serenity and bliss swept over the young woman. Now that all her relatives were close by, she knew for sure that happiness was a family.